He sees the American drop away and thinks the fight is over, not because the enemy is weak, because the pattern is familiar. A Japanese escort pilot near Wewak on the 11th of October 1943 has already learned to read the sky by shape and motion. A light fighter that misses its shot may still twist back inside the formation. A heavy fighter cannot. Not quickly, not cleanly, not before the bombers are gone and the moment is lost. And the machine falling away below him is the heaviest single-engine fighter he has ever seen. Big nose, deep belly, thick wing. A blunt American P-47. It has dived through the formation once. That alone is unnerving. But now it is below, fast and committed, the way a heavy fighter should be after one pass. In Japanese thinking, that should be the end of the problem. The big machine will need time. It will need room. It will have to climb wide, regroup, and come again later, if it comes again at all. Then the sky breaks the rule. The P-47 does not run. It does not wallow. It does not die in the dive. It converts speed into height, rolls over, and comes back down out of the sun so fast that men who thought they had one enemy pass to survive suddenly have a second one already on top of them. That was the miscalculation. And it did not happen because the American fighter was elegant. It happened because the Japanese had spent years learning how to beat the wrong kind of machine. To understand why that mattered, you have to go backward. Before Wewak, before New Guinea, before the first Thunderbolt shocked men who thought they knew what air combat was supposed to look like. Pre-war Japanese fighter doctrine was built around the master pilot. Long range, lightweight, tight turning, perfect control in the hands of a man who had trained hard enough to deserve it. The ideal was not an armored brute. The ideal was a blade. That philosophy shaped the A6M0 in naval service and the Ki-43 Oscar in the Army. Different aircraft, same instinct, save weight everywhere. Strip away what does not help the turn, the climb, the reach. If armor slows the aircraft, leave it out. If self-sealing fuel tanks add weight, accept the risk. If the pilot needs protection, trust his skill instead. In the opening years of the war, that formula worked with terrifying effect. Over China, over Malaya, over the Dutch East Indies, over the Philippines. Japanese pilots often entered combat with deeper training, tighter formation discipline, and aircraft that could outturn almost anything they met. Allied pilots who tried to fight by instinct, who hauled back on the stick and followed the Japanese into a turning contest, usually discovered the lesson too late. Turn with them, and you die. That reputation became its own weapon. By 1942, the myth was nearly as dangerous as the aircraft. Japanese fighters seemed to belong to a different school of war. Cleaner, leaner, more precise. A duelist's air force. But duelists live and die by standards that factories do not respect. The very features that made Japanese fighters so dangerous in the early war made them vulnerable once the enemy stopped agreeing to the duel. A machine without real armor saves weight, but it punishes the pilot for every mistake. A machine without effective self-sealing tanks gains range, but it can burn from a short, ugly burst. A pilot training system built to create experts produces brilliance, but it does not produce replacements quickly. Japan entered the middle years of the war with too many assumptions still intact. It still trusted the finished edge of the sword. It still believed the right man in the right cockpit could correct material weakness with skill. America was solving the same problem from the opposite direction. The P-47 Thunderbolt looked wrong to almost everyone at first glance. Even some American pilots thought it looked wrong. It was massive. Fully loaded, it could push toward 8 tons. Its fuselage was deep because the aircraft had been built around the Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial engine and a turbo supercharger system that sat far back in the fuselage, fed by long ducts and exhaust plumbing. That gave it bulk. It also gave it power where it mattered. At altitude, the thing could breathe. Its cockpit was armored. Its fuel tanks were self-sealing. Its engine was an air-cooled radial, which meant it could absorb punishment that would cripple liquid-cooled fighters. It carried 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing, with a weight of fire that could tear through lightly protected aircraft in a heartbeat. This was not a duelist's machine. This was a machine for a long war. Mud and oil. rivets and steel, maintenance crews, spare parts, volume production. A fighter meant to get a decent pilot home after an imperfect mission in an imperfect sky. The Japanese had built a sword for the trained artist. The Americans built a sledgehammer for the industrial age. There was just one problem. In the Southwest Pacific, nobody was quite sure the sledgehammer belonged in the knife fight. When General George Kenney was told one of his new fighter groups would have to take the P-47 because, in effect, nobody else wanted it, the Thunderbolt arrived in New Guinea carrying doubt almost as heavy as its fuselage. The 5th Air Force already had faith in the Lockheed P-38. The P-47 looked too heavy, too slow to climb, too clumsy at low speed. Against the Zero and the Oscar, many expected it to be meat. Neil Kirby disagreed. Kirby was not a theorist in a staff room. He was a Texan fighter leader with a hard competitive streak and an instinct for what an airplane could do if a pilot stopped demanding that it be something else. He understood the Thunderbolt's weakness immediately. At low speed, in a turning fight, the P-47 would lose to the best Japanese fighters. He understood its strengths just as clearly: high altitude, dive speed, roll rate at speed, firepower, durability, momentum. So he built tactics around reality. He took his Thunderbolts in high, where the turbo supercharger gave them power, and where height could be turned into violence. He taught his pilots to attack from above, fast and with surprise, fire one devastating pass, then use the energy of the dive to climb again for another pass. No lingering, no vanity turns, no trying to prove the P-47 could dance like an Oscar. It could not. It did not need to. The Japanese had spent years perfecting the close-in knife fight. Kirby was changing the terms of the fight itself. He was turning the Thunderbolt into a machine of repeated shock. Drop, fire, climb, reset, come again. To men below, it felt less like a dogfight than an execution of timing. On the 11th of October, 1943, Kirby took that idea over Wewak and forced the point. He led a flight of 4 Thunderbolts on what was supposed to be a reconnaissance and fighter sweep. High over the target area, with fuel already becoming a concern, the Americans had the advantage that mattered most: height. They could see the whole picture. Roughly 5 miles below lay a large Japanese air movement near Wewak, with fighters and bombers spread across the sky. This was not a balanced fight. It was close to 50 Japanese aircraft, including fighters and bombers, against Kirby and 3 other P-47. On paper, it looked reckless. In practice, it was exactly the kind of fight Kirby wanted. If he could strike first, and strike from above. The first victim was a lone Japanese fighter more than a mile below. Kirby pounced, hit it hard, and destroyed it. That alone was the kind of attack Japanese pilots had learned to fear from an unseen altitude advantage. But it was only the opening. Soon Kirby spotted the main formation, fighters cruising lower, bombers nearby. He and the Thunderbolts rolled over and went down at roughly 425 miles an hour. Pause there for a second, because this is the moment the old doctrine starts to fail. The Japanese escorts are not looking at a nimble opponent trying to win angles inside a circle. They are looking up into a diving wall of speed and metal. The Thunderbolt is not entering a turning contest. It is entering the formation like a shell. Kirby fired, and an Oscar went down. Then another. The Japanese formation began to scatter, because scattering was the only rational response once surprise had been lost. But scattering also broke the shape that had protected the bombers. That was the trap inside Kirby's method. A well-ordered escort could guard a formation. A broken escort became a set of isolated targets. The Thunderbolts used their speed to climb again and hit again. Kirby found more fighters. He struck them in sequence, not by circling gracefully with them, but by arriving fast, firing with brutal concentration, and refusing to stay slow any longer than he had to. At one point, when Captain John Moore was threatened by Japanese fighters, Kirby came in from distance and opened fire at what many pilots would have considered an optimistic range. He could do it because 8 heavy machine guns gave him volume. He could do it because he was arriving with speed. He could do it because the P-47 was not a rapier. It was a hammer swung downhill. One of Kirby's wing guns ran dry in the middle of the action, and the uneven recoil made the aircraft harder to hold straight. Even then, he kept pressing. He fought the controls, stayed online, and kept firing with the remaining guns. That is one of the small details people miss when they talk only about courage. Courage mattered. So did engineering margin. So did gun battery. So did the fact that the airplane was built to keep functioning in ugly conditions that would have made a lighter fighter far less manageable. When the fight ended, Kirby had 6 confirmed victories for the day. His flight had destroyed more. The Americans had entered a sky crowded with Japanese aircraft and come out without losing a Thunderbolt. That was the real message over Wewak. Not that the P-47 was prettier, not that it turned tighter, not that it fit the old rules better than the Japanese did. The message was worse than that. The message was that the rules had changed. Japanese pilots had been trained for a war in which the superior airman in the superior turning fighter could still dominate the local fight. Kirby was proving that by late 1943, against American industry and American adaptation, that world was slipping away. If the enemy would not turn with you, if he would attack only from height and speed, if his airplane could absorb punishment and still come back, if each pass carried 8 heavy machine guns and he had the fuel, maintenance system, and production line to send more like him tomorrow, then the old advantages became narrower every month. And yet there is a harder truth here, because Kirby himself would prove it. The danger in a successful tactic is not just that the enemy studies it. The danger is that the man who made it work begins to believe he can break his own rule and get away with it. On the 5th of March, 1944, near Wewak again, Kirby led another attack, this time against Japanese aircraft that included Ki-43 Oscar. On the first pass, he hit one enemy. So far, so familiar. Then came the fatal choice. Instead of staying in the Thunderbolt's kind of fight, he slowed and turned, trying to work onto another Japanese fighter in a low-speed engagement. That was exactly what he had taught others not to do. Below about 200 miles an hour, the Oscar still owned the geometry. Japanese pilots slipped in behind the slowing Thunderbolt. 2 were driven off, a third got a burst into Kirby's cockpit. His P-47 Fiery Ginger went straight into the jungle. No parachute. That ending matters because it keeps the history honest. The Thunderbolt was not magic. Kirby was not superhuman. The P-47 did not make the Japanese obsolete by itself, and it did not repeal the laws of air combat. What it did do, when used correctly, was expose the weakness in the old Japanese system. It turned every contest away from elegance and toward survival, firepower, altitude, and repeatability. It punished fragile airframes. It punished pilot losses that could not be replaced. It punished any doctrine that still imagined the war would be decided by a small cast of masters in perfect machines. Kirby's own death was the final proof. The old Japanese style could still kill you if you accepted its terms. The Thunderbolt changed the war only when it refused those terms. That is why the story matters beyond one mission, one ace, or one day over New Guinea. By the middle of the war, the Allies were learning a brutal lesson faster than Japan was. Wars of this scale are not won by the most graceful airplane in a clean turning circle. They are won by the side that can combine design, training, maintenance, fuel, replacement crews, tactics, and production into one ugly, reliable system. The side that can take damage, the side that can make a mistake and still stay airborne. The side that can lose a veteran and still put another competent pilot in another machine tomorrow. Japan's early war fighter arm had been brilliant, but it was brittle. America's answer was rarely beautiful. It was durable. The P-47 was the shape of that answer, a radial engine that could keep running after punishment. Armor around the pilot, self-sealing tanks under him, a turbo supercharger that made altitude a weapon. 8 heavy machine guns that did not ask for a perfect deflection shot to do serious work. A giant airframe that looked like too much airplane until the shooting started. And once men like Kirby found the right method, the Thunderbolt stopped being the wrong fighter for the Pacific. It became the fighter that forced Japanese pilots to look up. So when people remember those huge American fighters over New Guinea and the Philippines, and wonder why Japanese pilots sometimes misread them, the answer is simple. They were looking at the Thunderbolt through an older lens. They saw bulk and assumed clumsiness. They saw one diving pass and assumed separation. They saw a heavy fighter and expected the laws of the early war to hold. Then the P-47 came back down again, fast, still armed, still alive, and carrying an idea the Japanese system was no longer built to survive. If your father flew in those skies, or your grandfather kept one of those machines running with a wrench in the mud, honor him in the comments with his unit, his aircraft, or whatever part of his story your family still carries. Those details matter. They are how the real record stays alive. And if you want more straight factual history told without the nonsense, hit the like button so more people find it, and subscribe for the next chapter.